G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. In late 1999, from his bedroom in Sydney, Mark started a developer code sharing website in the now defunct Flash animation technology. 3 months later, he cheekily approached Internet.com, a NASDAQ-listed company, asking if they would like to buy his one-person company. From their positive response, he scrambled to partner with a tech company in Tasmania to not only look bigger to his suitor, but also bulk up the team and support the fast growth needed to maximise his exit. Only 3 months after that cheeky email and 6 months from his start, Internet.com acquired the business with a 12-month earnout paid on active users in 12 months' time. Mark and the team of, by then, 15 FTE, got active users from 3,000 to 3 million a month only a year later. 2 months after the payout, the 2001 tech wreck happened. Mark was able to travel the world for a few years, having sold his very fast-growing tech company within 18 months of starting it in his bedroom. He believes the hardest thing in growing a small business... He believes the hardest thing in growing a small business is managing the time, balancing with friends, partners, and your kids. Advice he'd give himself on day one is legal advice. Make sure you read contracts and understand them, and stay away from crypto trading like Bitcoin. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm interviewing Mark Fennell from FlashKit. Thanks for your time today, Mark.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with such esteemed company as yourself and the other people on your podcast.
Oh, you're making me blush now. Let's start with how we know each other. Do you remember how we met and what the connection is?
So we met, I think, through the National Australian Association of University Colleges. I hope I got that right.
That's right.
If I remember correctly, it's basically like almost like an organisational group that people from various Australian university colleges came together to better involve their campuses and their students and try to make sort of share experiences across. I was impressed I actually got the name right, the NORC. I mean, you're probably better off to define NORC. What is NORC?
Yeah, that's a good question. The unpolitical answer is one giant piss up for a week.
Yes.
Party, but no, it is about helping people that live on campus at universities, what in Australia we call colleges, help them improve that college experience for students. So 1 or 2 students from most universities in Australia, and by the end of our time there, New Zealand was joining us as well. They'd be about 200 students from around Australia and New Zealand would meet up for a week and get great speakers in, like I still remember Peter Garrett from Midnight Oil and a recent minister here in Australia. Very, very tall man. He came and spoke once. So, yeah, it's all really about that developing college life, I guess.
And you were, I think, the president, the vice president at the time?
Yeah, I was. If my memory serves me correctly, it was 24 years ago, 1996, was the conference that I hosted at my university in Bendigo, at La Trobe University, and you and Sinclair came along to that. I think I'd already met Andrew, but I hadn't met you until that year.
No, I think you met me first because I was there the year before.
Oh, right. That's how much memory.
Andrew.
That's how much memory we have of these conferences.
I dragged Andrew to his first one a couple of years after I'd been. I think I became the magazine editor after the first one. And
that's right. Yeah,
that magazine editor role for about, 6 years?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah, so you must have been in Hobart in 1995, and that's one of the reasons why I now live in Hobart is because that's where I met Greg Ramsey. Actually, he came along to the 96 conference and when I organised, but I'd met his older sister the year before, and Greg is very persuasive, as you well know. He's a good friend of ours at getting people to move to Tasmania, which I did 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's tell our audience a little bit about your business. I know you might have to dust off the cobwebs of memories because you exited this business. It was 20 years ago now, isn't it? It was 2000?
So I think when you asked me to come on this, it's like, well, I can definitely give you some conversation around it, but this is like 20 years ago, so I had to definitely dig out the old annals of time. I had to look through a bunch of old photos to work out what my timeline was.
Yeah.
Excel document or a Google document called Fennell Timeline, where I actually listed what did I do over these years. So I think too, and in terms of where I came from too, I actually lived in Hobart for a while, so I went to university there.
Yep.
engineering. And at university, I started probably my first business, and that was with Andrew, who you were referring to before. We started in my last year of university of engineering. We started a web design company, and this was back in, I think, 1997. We started our first one.
Yep.
The funny thing is we had some great ideas at the right time, just in the wrong place. So I think one of the hardest things we found, particularly in Tasmania, was convincing people what the internet was, let alone why they needed a website. So,
especially late 90s, yeah, that would have been a real challenge.
Yeah, so I think, we were way ahead of our time. I think we built quite a cool little e-commerce platform way back there, and I think we spent 3 months on it for a grand total of $800. We were paid for it, and it was a Excel spreadsheet that would then generate a JavaScript shopping e-commerce platform, complete with like dynamic cart contents and all the rest. And it was brilliant, and we actually flogged that for a number of years afterwards. But
you two are such nerds.
Yeah. I think part of our underlying motivation as well is we thought we'd be looking more suave and sophisticated when we had a business card, but
it's better for talking to the ladies.
Yeah, didn't really work so well. But
So how did FlashKit come about? I love this story, and I'm sure I'm going to learn more about it today.
Look, so we ran that company for a couple of years, and then it was actually at one of your Norca conferences that I met someone, and she convinced me that it's time to move to Sydney. So we put that business on the back burner. I moved to Sydney.
Just on that, I love you telling me. You told me this probably 15 years ago. Oh, maybe it was 20 years ago when you did move to Sydney. I said, what was the motivation to move to Sydney? And you told me your thought process that you weren't really going to follow through with it. So your strategy was to tell everyone down here in Hobart, I'm moving to Sydney. And then you had to force yourself to move to Sydney.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a saving face exercise. It's very true. I'm glad you remember that one. I still do that now.
So you've told everyone except your wife, Sarah, that you're moving back to Tasmania?
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, she's potentially open to the idea. We'll see. Yeah. We'll do a trial run. So anyway, look, I moved to Sydney and started work for a company up in Sydney. And I still did a little bit of work down for some companies in Tasmania. We worked on Sydney Hobart website, Target Tasmania website with a crew down there. And started just basically getting into Flash at the time, which was like the big animation sort of language and tool at the time. I think what I realized quite early on is that I really sucked at it. And the fact that I was really quite bad at it, and there was very little in the way of additional resources out there to actually help you learn to be better at it. It's like, oh, crikey, there's something there for me to sort of jump in on. You've noticed that I used the word crikey there. I'm now a parent, and my swearing has become much more restrained.
Kid friendly.
Kid friendly. So yeah, I started sort of exploring, well, how do I sort of build a bit more of an educational resource around that? So I started sort of writing a few tutorials and actually reaching out to people and say, hey, can you share some of how you did this? I mean, really, it was initially quite a selfish thing. As I saw people who had built great content, and it was like, wow, I wonder how they did that. I'm just going to ask them if they'll give it to me.
Yeah.
And under the guise of a knowledge sharing site, they were actually quite amenable to it. The other thing that I think triggered it as well was there was a bit of, I guess, an opportunity in the sense that back then, when you're looking for sound effects on the internet, the process was somewhat laborious. You'd find a sound, maybe a site with sounds on it. You click the sound, you'd have to literally download the sound before you could preview it. So if you wanted to find, say, a UI click or something, you could spend an hour looking through 50, 60 sounds. So what Flash allowed me to do was actually to create almost like an online preview system, which no one had done at the time. And that became almost like the biggest traffic area of our site. I used to gather a bunch of sound effects from people, manually create them into almost like a list of things in Flash with a little play button. And then you just, for a user, they just be able to click it, play, and preview the sound. So I guess you could say it was born out of an opportunity to make people's lives a bit easier in terms of the sound stuff, and also for me to sort of grow my own knowledge in a lazy way.
Yeah. And this was late 99, wasn't it?
Yeah. So look, I mean, it was a very fast sort of process. So the idea for me to sort of start it was mulling around, I guess, probably late 99. In October 99, I'd sort of like registered the website and had like, a very basic version of it up. And, like in that first 3 months, it kind of just almost like just went bananas.
Yeah.
So, like in terms of the timeline, it was quite fun. I mean, it was 1999. I was like 24, working out of my bedroom in Sydney, and like this thing was going nuts. So one of the things back then, though, that the problem of it was expensive. So back then, bandwidth cost a lot, and for a silly little like home-based website, it was starting to rack up like $3,000 a month in hosting fees, $4,000 a month in hosting fees,
Wow.
$10,000 a month in hosting fees, and this is the first 3 months. At which point, I'm starting to think, "Geez, what can I do here? This is killing me."
Holy shit! Yeah.
Very expensive. So from there, like, I mean, I was still in that sort of like that growth mind state, and one of the things obviously back then, advertising worked and was a big revenue opportunity for websites. So the key thing was to drive traffic. So back then, there was a company, internet.com, that I at one point just sent a cheeky email to saying, "Hey, you guys are missing from your entire developer sort of platform something around Flash, and like what opportunities it has for front end and all the rest." The very next day, I had a phone call. "Hi, this is Dan from internet.com. I'm the business development manager there. I'd like to talk to you about it."
And for context, internet.com was a fairly big company. They were listed on the NASDAQ, weren't they?
Yeah, and they're still very big. They became they own things like Getty Images and all the rest now. So yeah, look, they basically reached out and said, basically, like, we want to acquire you. At this point in time, I kind of like had some insight that, well, if they want to acquire me and I'm a one-person operator running out of a bedroom, that's not going to be a big stretch for them. They'll be like, "Oh, well, like, what does he want?" So, this is again where I tie back to my Tasmanian, like roots, in the sense is like I've done some work with a company down there, Turnaround. So I reached out to them, and they were an IT solutions provider with a lot of people. So
yeah, ironically, yes, Steve was running that, owning that, and I think I've mentioned previously in a previous life when Steve was an administrator. I think he was at KPMG. He actually ran, I think it was a fuel distributorship in Shepparton, where my dad lives, and was actually a direct competitor to my dad. Dad was the BP distributor. So yeah, funny how timelines tangle like that. Yeah, Steve, and obviously Andrew was working at Turnaround at the time, and James McGregor, who's been on this cast, was at Turnaround.
And so basically it was, like I realised that, I needed to look bigger. So I talked to Steve at Turnaround, and basically they jumped on board and said, "Look, we'll represent what you are, and let's do a deal." So we then ended up talking back with internet.com, and basically like 3 months later, we'd sold it.
Wow. So what's that timeline then? All up 6 months, 9 months?
3 months. But so the nature of the sale, though, was they saw an opportunity with the website. The way they wanted to structure the deal and did structure the deal was like, "Here's your website. Your payment will be based on how much traffic you can generate in 1 year's time, and we will pay you for the number of page views you get of the month of December."
Right.
So we basically had a 1 year growth mandate. So,
but just going back to the time, so when you effectively started it to when they bought you, it was 3 months of discussion before they bought you, but how long before that you sent that email really had you effectively started?
About 3 months.
Yeah, so all up 6 months from starting to internet.com buying you, and then obviously another year to grow it out, to fully earn out.
That's about an effect. That's a good enough timeline.
Yep, got it. Yeah, and so James from McGregor from Vital, he came on board, did some work on that project with you?
So we had a mandate to run it for 1 year, and then we had after the sale. So we had like the sale started, the deal was done in like January 2000. The payment terms were December 2000, and then we had 1 year to run it after that. And in that year of 2001, that's where James came on board to help us out. He came out to help us out, organise some of our events and our conferences, and also just general sort of like knowledge extraction from my head and turning into useful for other people.
And Ed Carroll was involved in this as well, a good friend of ours who started Sift, in Sydney, which is an IT security firm. Ed was involved a little bit.
He was my very first employee, and I'd like to that I gave him his very first job. So I hired him to write tutorials for him, sitting next to me in my bedroom.
Great. Yeah, great.
Which was quite funny.
And he's also a NORC alumni. That's where we met him at that annual student conference. Yeah.
And he's gone on to do great things, works at the United Nations now. And
yep. Yeah, he and Nick built up SIFT. I think they got to about 80 or 90 staff. They had 2 or 3 mergers. They sold. They got sold a couple of times. Yeah, it's a great story. Mm. So, yeah, maybe can we talk a bit about any numbers to illustrate this phenomenal growth? I have a vague memory of you telling me, for example, number of hits per month, because you kept breaking hosting company after hosting company into...
Yeah, look, so, I mean, I've got some numbers down. I mean, the main thing is, like, we had a mandate to grow. So, like, for us, our entire methodology was to grow. So, like, I was able to basically grab a large part, if not almost all, of the turnaround team back there and just basically drive them into growth sort of methodologies and strategies. So we started basically very, very maybe like 3,000 people a month when I'd sold it. And by the time we got to the December of the next year, we were getting 3 million unique visitors a month.
Holy shit. Wow.
Which is quite good. We'd built a forum there. We had 600,000 active users on that.
Yep.
Which was brilliant. And, you know, like just some funny things, you know, our hosting fees for those later months were about $75,000 a month, which I wasn't paying for at this point, which was great. But we were paying internet.com was paying a hosting company in the States until they were able to take over the hosting themselves. But, you know, we were delivering, I think, about 3 terabytes a month, which back then it's a sizable chunk and costs, you know, that much. Now it's probably cost you about like $500 a month.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, that when we were paying that much to the hosting company, they would, they flew us out to New York and gave us a bit of a VIP treatment. Here's your Broadway shows. Here's your drive around, because we were probably one of their biggest customers as well.
Yeah. Wow. Fantastic. Yeah. Now, I think I might know the answer to this next question. When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded? Was that when you turned up to Rich's Ocean Grove pad New Year's Eve, 2001, I think?
Look, it could have been. Like, I was definitely feeling. I mean, it's a weird one. So, like on the Flash Kit story, like because it was a defined target.
Yeah.
You know, that moment, that first conversation happened was a validation, I guess, of the idea and what was there. And then obviously the success of that was just driven, like, you know, we could see the monthly incremental growth of our traffic. And then, you know, seeing that grow and grow and grow and grow was brilliant. And part of it felt like, you know, I almost felt a bit, you know, dirty inside as a graphic designer and a UX designer. What is good UX is not the same as number of page views.
Yeah.
So, you know, like what could have been the system to browse, say, a collection of images or asset files that could have used a dynamic JavaScript folder system where it all opened up cleanly and neatly in a tree view to the side. Well, each one of them was a page refresh. And, you know, so if you wanted to drill 10 ways down, it was 10 page views. So, like, I mean, we had to structure that and approach it from the point of view of, like, you know, what was your end goal, which sometimes, you know, was converse to the UX experience. So, yeah, when did I feel like I succeeded? Definitely at the end, getting paid, but also that whole journey along the way, just having the opportunity as well to possibly, you know, to really innovate in that space.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what allowed us to keep growing is, you know, having the security of knowing that you had a strong exit strategy there allowed us to put time and money and muscle into things that people wouldn't have even thought about doing in that Flash space. So,
yes.
You know, an example of that is we really built on that sound tool that I'd started, and we had a guy who'd take the sound effects. He'd do fast Fourier transform on them, generate all the waveforms. We'd then bake that in with the sound. And, you know, back then you could then download the sound. You then download all the waveform data to build your own little visualizers and all the rest. And, you know, it was cool. People loved it. But it's the overhead to have created that just by yourself, I don't think anybody would have done.
Yeah.
It allowed us a real opportunity to innovate in that space.
Yep. And for the millennials out there listening, because Flash isn't really... Is it technically dead now? It's not.
It's dead. I think Chrome is going to kill it at the end of this year.
Yep.
Steve Jobs killed it in 2007 pretty well anyway with the iPhone.
Yeah, right. So this technology obviously isn't around anymore for people to kind of get context of what you're talking about, but it was very big at the time. And what I always loved about your story was you knew when to get out you took the opportunity because only soon after the deal was inked, within a year or so, the tech wreck happened, didn't it?
Yeah, well, basically, I think literally about 2 months after being paid, the .com bubble burst.
Yep.
And obviously, a lot of those companies, which back then were just basically all about growth, acquisition, that entire space almost evaporated overnight.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing for people to keep in mind, that you took that opportunity. You knew it was time to get out. And you didn't want to perpetuate the risk, whereas obviously a lot of people hung on and literally walked away with nothing after that bubble burst.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. You'd see startups. I remember there's one in Sydney, I can't remember what the name, but they had a huge amount of seed funding, and they decided they'd fill basically half their office with just these bright fluorescent green bean bags that cost thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does success look like to you?
So, look, I mean, I'm going to look at that in a couple of perspectives. I think about what this, one of your earlier questions that you'd sent me was, this is the story about, hey, how did you move from a fast career into a fast, moving small business? So this is my story. It's about moving from a fast moving small business into a career.
Yes.
The Benjamin Button model.
Love it.
So I've got, I guess, two contexts. So I think, to put it a bit more in context now, I guess where I am now is I'm a director of gaming at a indie game development studio in Sydney called SMG Studio, and they're well known and decent size like SME that produces some great titles. So in terms of what does success look like for you as a question, I'll answer that in two ways. First one's obviously from the Flash Kit perspective, and obviously then now with the grey hair maturity that I have now.
A lot of salt and pepper. Yep.
Yeah, look, I think I've got more salt and pepper than colour. So yeah, look, I mean, back then, obviously, success. There was a couple of things that drove success back then. So one was obviously there was the money. It's, there's a fiscal reward, and at 24, 25, 26, knowing that you're going to have an earner above and beyond anything that you'd earned before is a huge motivation. And the other thing too is back then, at that youthful age, ego was a big driver as well. So, being, I guess, I'd use the phrase flash royalty at the time, I was flown out to many conferences, you were a big deal in that space. It was kind of like a celebrity status without, all the sort of, I guess, the paparazzi impression that goes with being a true celebrity. So it was develop a celebrity, which I think is a bit more manageable and a bit more pleasant.
Yep.
And I think too that, given Flash was both artistic and technical, it meant that the audience that you were appealing to was, across all gender sort of profiles. Whereas I think, you find that I think, particularly development definitely skews probably more male heavily, just, in that sort of arena.
Yeah. So,
from the point of view of Flash Kit, it was basically financial and ego being success. Then I think now, with the hindsight, I think it's really simple. Success to me is just enjoying what I do.
Yeah.
Like the company I'm at now, I've been there for basically after finishing Flash Kit, I traveled the world for a bit. Then I've been at this company now for probably 11 years now.
Wow. Okay.
And it's I make games there. I think the opportunity with a company like that is you can make games of a bigger scope with a team. And that's great. But when I come home and I want to do something, I still make games, but I just make my own. I just dabble, I tinker, I think, for me, what I've always loved about games, and it's taken me a while to realize why I like games, is games are hard.
Yeah.
I think games actually, the challenge of games is possibly the hardest thing in computing to do. You've got to, it's a lot of maths, it's a lot of physics. Then you've got sound design, you've got user experience design, you've got graphics. You've got to try and encapsulate fun, and that in itself is incredibly hard to encapsulate. And then you've all got to wrap it up and be mindful of performance and file size. So it really, I think every part of the technical and visual state of it is quite tricky. And then at the end of that, each game is a product in its own right, and then has to be promoted and built. So it's a really, I think, an exciting medium, and I think that's why I've still stuck with it, and still love doing it.
Yeah, great. And what about funding? Obviously, until the deal was signed, did you just fund it yourself, pretty much?
No, well, see, I mean, that was that. I mean, there's a lot of an entertaining anecdote from this. So, like, obviously, like partnering with Turnaround was great at the time because not only did they offer the people to run it, they offered the line of credit to run it with the mindset that, okay, you can have all of these people. We'll go halves in the cost of them. And you just tell me how many people you need and off you go. So basically, I racked up debt over a year.
Yep.
So I think close to the end of the year, I had racked up, like $900,000 worth of employee debt. So if anything with this deal fell over,
Wow.
and then I was also liable for here's your incurred employee debt that you've now racked up.
Yeah.
So,
Steve is obviously a very smart guy and knows how to structure a deal. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you were, go.
No.
I was thinking next one. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
God, no. Flash is dead.
I know. I was going to say it's a bit moot because that technology's dead. But you're still in it, I guess. Gaming now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would love to do something in this space. It's just a matter of I think it's a matter of finding out what would be appropriate. So, like, I look back on what FlashKit was and why it worked, and I think it's it's a platform.
Yeah.
And all the big things these days that work really well are platforms. Your Airbnbs, your Facebooks, your Patreons, your Kickstarters. They're all platforms. And I think this was a platform for Flash. So I think maybe there's something in the game space that has that same sort of platform, but I'm not sure now.
Yeah.
I probably want to give it a lot more thought before I jump into another venture like that.
Yeah. Right. Well, can you outline the most stressful point in your FlashKit journey?
I can outline a funny little story that was possibly the most stressful point in the entire project. So one of the things that there's a big buzz. The Flash platform every couple of years that announce a new version, and
I remember this story. This is gold.
And the whole place would go bananas. So Flash 5 had literally just come out. And everyone was pretty pumped. So anyway, we thought it would be quite funny to create a fake launch of Flash 6. So we created a whole bunch of fake screenshots of what the new version of Flash would look like. We posted it on the site, and it had all these cool features. 3D.
And you would have had a couple of million active users by then.
Look, we had a bit of traffic, and obviously the goal of this was to build growth.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, it went better than we could possibly have imagined, and it just went gangbusters and went nuts and went everywhere.
Until you got the phone call.
Yeah, well, then I think it was 3 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang and I picked it up, and it was such and such from Macromedia's legal team. Their attorneys had basically given me a call and said, take it down. So I think putting it in context, when I put the screenshots up, their share price also had a little bit of a spike as well.
Because Macromedia owned the Flash technology. Yeah.
They did. So that was, I think, luckily for me, I didn't own shares or anything in Macromedia. I think that would have been a bit more awkward.
Yep.
So anyway, their share price went up. I had a conversation then with their attorneys who, in no uncertain terms, asked me to remove it. And that I had a very short sort of time frame to do it. This, of course, compounding with the fact that, oh God, if I've just blown this all up, I'm either going to get sued by Macromedia, I'm going to have to pay for all these people that I've lost their website. So, look, next day, took them all down, put a big apology, retracted it. Macromedia's share price went down further than it was the day before.
Jeez.
So at which point I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get sued here as well.
Yeah. And
I think for the next few days after that, just that sitting and waiting and hoping that nothing would happen, and nothing did.
That's good.
The most stressful part of that project.
I'd totally forgotten about that story when I was thinking about this interview. Yeah, wow.
And I think it was fun. It was cheeky.
Yes, well, that's very much you, Mark, isn't it? What area in this business do you feel you had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think this was probably the question that when I read through it, that I had to think about the most. I don't know if I'm going to have a great answer, but it's also the question that's made me realize that I need to talk to people like you more often as well. I think the realization I had from this was that I've always been probably more of the ideas person, and I've always worked best when partnered with someone with a bit more of that, like the drive to run a business.
Yeah,
I'm less motivated to run the business of businesses, but I like to have someone who I can work with to do that. and all of the things that have done really well in my life, games, businesses, have been in combination with someone like that. So I think, like for me, building on that is something that I need to continue to work on. And I think too, now in my general day to day, because I also look after a bunch of people, and I know one of my weaknesses is definitely like keeping them motivated in the sense of like looking up after their development plans, their goal setting, and all the rest. I always, I've always been a maker. I like to make things, design things, create things.
Yeah.
So like when it comes to trying to set that up for other people, I find a million ways to procrastinate.
At least you're honest.
Or more so than studying for exams, and I think too that's like possibly something that I think you could probably help me with, Troy.
Yes.
And I think this was like a really an interesting insight from this whole process. Like, actually, you know what? That is a big weakness I have, and that's something that I would like to actually build on. So
yeah, no, I totally understand. Now, apart from the call from Macromedia, what did you enjoy the least about that fast growth business?
I could do time consumption.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, I think, in any startup, and possibly the reason why I probably haven't pursued one since.
Yeah.
It's just the time.
You were doing huge days, weren't you? Like 12 or 16-hour days.
Easily. I was getting up at like 5:36 in the morning, chewing through the 1,000 emails that would come through every day. Because in that 1,000, there'd be one or two that would actually be really useful. But you have to go through all the guff. And part of being a community sort of like driven site as well as being a community.
Yes.
So, and it was an important part. And I think part of its success was being approachable and available, but it took a lot of time. And then to actually then coordinate other people to have ideas to build stuff. So time, I think, was the worst part, having none of it.
Yeah.
Apart from working on that sort of business. And I think that's probably something that affects almost everybody in startup space.
Definitely. And what was the biggest mindset shift through this whole very fast journey?
Look, I think going back to like that, I think it's probably like more through that fast journey, like it was just go. But I think now with the power of reflection time, I think now that I'm older, I think the biggest mindset I've had change is to understand and use the power of delegation.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's funny, it takes you a long time. It took me a long time to realize that by delegating something to somebody else, it's not diminishing your value, it's making them feel better.
Yeah.
And then you get to do other things and help in more ways. So, like where I am now, I think, half of the reason I'm still there, and the thing I tell people is like each one of these grey hairs is a mistake that they don't have to make.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to use that.
Well, you can use the hair. Every hair gone is a mistake you don't have to make. But the point is, you've got a lot of people who come in and work, and we use a lot of real-time communications, and I like to stay across all of it. I think half my time is probably just like monitoring that and just going, they have a problem there, that person solved that in the past, you two should talk, and you'll save 3 days of bumbling around. So it's the power of delegation also gives you an opportunity to have, I guess, that greater oversight of, I know they've done that, I've known they've done that, and I know that. So that, to me, is probably the biggest mindset shift that I've had. It's actually generated tangible and really powerful results. Yeah,
right. And what about the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Balance.
Yeah.
We've all worked too hard. We've all burnt out relationships, we've missed friends, we've missed fitness, you got kids, you miss time with them, you miss sleep. So I think balance and when you're poor and and trying to get something off the ground, that's hard to come by. So that's you work extra hard. When you're cash strapped, it's hard. So.
Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. growasmallbusiness.com. Well, let's talk a little bit about adding people to the team. I assume Ed didn't come through Turnaround. That was through the conference connection, I guess. But were all the other team members coming through Turnaround effectively?
For most of them, yeah. So they were basically like a ready-made sort of like, resource for development.
Yeah.
but I think, too, I mean, given that where I am now too, I do a lot of hiring and sort of like resource filling now I am. So I think, like I can probably give a bit of context to that just based on how I've hired recently and also like how we hired back then too. So I think in terms of like where I've hired and the hiring of the winners has been, the best experience are the people that you have to chase.
Yes.
The people that you want, they've got some great content on Twitter. They're doing cool stuff. They worked on a title that you've seen in the past. I'd love them to, they bring a spark already, and they're already good.
Yeah.
And so the winners that we've always had are the people that we can find in that space. You chase them down, and you get them. The way I always like to look at it is it's always good to have someone who pulls you along somewhere rather than having to push them somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And that's how I like, and particularly in creative spaces, it's a lot harder. And games as well, it's hard to find those people who are just like, who just like hit you almost with too many ideas, and each one of them is triggering something. They're the real winners. They're the ones that I want to sort of like, that we've had the most success hiring. And I think like people like Ed and James as well. Like they're those sort of people as well. They was like they would always pull you along in terms of like, what about this idea? Have you thought about this? Have you done that? Instead of me saying, here's your job, here's your task. It'd be like, just no, stop. Can you just do what I'm asking you to do? But they're so I think they're the winners. I think you got to. I think what are the mistakes? I think the biggest mistake that have made in the past and still make now is like when you hire out of desperation.
Yes, good point.
So like when you just need to put bums on seats because there's more work than you can, and you're not hiring for the culture, you're not hiring for the fit, you're hiring, you got to get a job done.
Yep.
And and if you've got that short hiring time frame, you don't have the luxury. So you just you can often hire.
Well, maybe speak to that, the culture. What do you recommend to building a kick-ass and sustainable culture to help with growth?
Look, I mean, we've been fortunate where I am now. We have lost very few people, and we've worked on some pretty challenging sort of projects. And I think I would spend time breaking this down. I think number one is to listen.
Yep.
And be available. So like what is relevant to a company of 20 somethings in a startup is going to be very different to a bunch of 40 something parents.
Yes.
Like what's going to motivate and drive them, and if you've got a mix of both, like what's going to drive them is going to be different. So a weekly piss up might appeal to the former, but maybe not the latter.
Yeah.
The latter might be just the best thing you can do is just let me go home early and pick my kids up from school. You know what I mean? So like be listening, be available. I mean, I've always kind of prided myself on not screaming or flying off the handle.
Yep. I've
definitely worked with some boss types that fly off the handle, and I just don't think it is conducive. Like like no one it works better when they're being screamed at.
Management by fear, as I like to say, doesn't work. It may work short term, but people leave. Your A players will just get sick of it if you're an arsehole, and medium to long term, you go backwards.
And it's just like the classic thing is like, with your kids, it's like, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed.
It's very powerful, isn't it?
And it's the same sort of thing. And the other thing too, I think it's important too to lead by example. Like, we've worked on loads of projects to the late hours. And I think if you're going to ask someone to work late on something, be there with them.
Yep.
Until they ask you to leave, because they're actually then feeling like completely like, you don't need to be here. Just pick off and do what you need to do. But at least they know there's that validation.
Before we move into professional development, how many FTE did you have at FlashKit at your peak? Now, obviously, if you were working 16-hour days, effectively, you were probably 2 FTE yourself.
Yeah.
Kind of all the...
We had 14.
14, wow. Fantastic, yeah. Round it up to 15 if we double your time.
Yeah. And I think just going back onto that culture thing too, there's a couple of other things that I there was a note that I actually put in there that I thought was quite relevant. I think is like making sure that in that part of leading by example is if you stay late and work late and you're managing a team of people, then they feel obliged to stay late and work late too, not necessarily intrinsically, but just by observation. So if you leave on time, you give permission to people to leave on time. So you can actually like help manage a pressure as well.
And that balance, yeah.
Yeah, and that balance by leading by example.
Yep. I think that's a really good point, because there is still a bit of a hangover from not just in the tech space, but people, a bit of the old school mindset of everyone's got to be here till 7 or 8 at night. But if you've got a healthy culture in place where you are seeking that balance for your team, that's a great point, is that you leave at 5 o'clock and then everyone else feels like it's okay, they can as well.
And I think too, like the other thing is just like, clear communications. And, one of the things, especially in games, is like what's in my head and what you heard are not necessarily the same thing. Yep. So making sure that, like you take the time to either, document in a way that people will understand, or, you spend the time talking and validating those conversations so that what I'm thinking or what somebody else is thinking, everybody else understands.
Yep.
All implement in the right way.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite Peter Drucker quotes. Communication is what the listener does. So it's my responsibility to make sure that I communicate clearly and in your language, and you get everything that I'm trying to convey. Yeah. Well, what about professional development? Did you invest much in the FlashKit times?
Nah.
Sorry, internet just cut out a bit then. Sorry.
I say no, not really in the FlashKit times, and rarely now either. I mean, I think it's something that like you've basically helped identify as something that I probably need to spend more time of. I think it's hard too, though. Like, I mean, in the cutting edge game space as well, you don't really have a lot of peers necessarily. In many ways, you're actually like pioneering stuff.
Yeah.
As soon as a new device comes out or something like that, or you have to crack a new problem. So it's hard to sort of like contextualize a lot of that in terms of professional development.
Yep. What about mentors and coaches during the FlashKit days? Did you have any? Steve was obviously a big influence.
Yeah, so he was. And I think what I learned from him the most was, if we'd go somewhere, he would basically he'd sell me in the sense it's like, hey, this is this person, blah, blah. And, it takes a long time to be able to sell yourself, if you know what I mean. Like most people rarely still do it, I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet or whatever, but like to hear someone sell you after a while, and that was a really powerful thing. Probably the most important thing I learned was the ability to be able to like sell myself.
Yep.
And I think, that's something that I think, is a great thing for everyone to learn moving forward. And I think, a really powerful thing for anyone to get from a mentoring perspective is.
Yeah, right. Yep. No other mentors or coaches then during that time?
No. And, like in retrospect, I wish I'd had some. I would have loved some financial coaches.
Yep.
I had plenty of squandering coaches.
Yeah, I think I met a few of those. And I assume you didn't have a board of directors or advisors either. It was really just Steve
and that company. So
yeah. All right, we're into the final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
I think it's just that managing of the time, balancing that with friends and partners, children. So I think time is obviously the main one, and I think obviously is like especially for cash strapped, being poor.
Yep.
FlashKit beans.
Yeah. And favorite business book which helped you the most?
So I consume, I guess, a lot of internet content, always have. I think the 2 books that I remember were obviously The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss and Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yep.
I don't remember why I remember them, but I just remember them being quite cool at the time.
Yeah, they're both great books.
And I think I should give them a reread now that I think of it.
What about any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
YouTube. I've learned everything from YouTube. I've learned how to concrete from YouTube. I've learned how to build stone walls from YouTube. Yep. I've learned how to code stuff on YouTube. Like my kids have started playing Roblox, which is like a gaming platform. Oh, I wonder what that's. Boom, I'll make a game in Roblox. How do I do that? I'll jump on YouTube. So I think YouTube for me is probably the greatest resource in terms of online knowledge sourcing.
Yeah. Yeah, great. What about one tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I can't give you just one tool. There's heaps. But I think, it depends on what you need to do. So for me, I only listed 4.
Okay.
So for me, with any project, I always like to start with like that mind mapping phase. So basically, whether it's a client project, whether it's a game I want to make, or like I literally just dump every single idea, every single brain fart, every piece of random shit that is appropriate to this sort of project into a mind map. So I just write it all down, blah 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 blah. No organization, we'll just dump it down, and then spend that time to then just organize it. And what I've always found using that process is just like buckets of organization come out themselves. So for me, like a mind mapping tool is essential for initial sort of like organization of ideas, thoughts, and projects. I just use FreeMind for that because it's free and fast. The online ones are a bit too slow for my typing. Google Docs, probably the second one I use, and the reason I love it so much is because it's collaborative.
Yeah, me too. I love Google. Yeah.
So having multiple people in a spreadsheet, or where I think it's really good is multiple people in a presentation. So, like if we're doing a pitch for a project or an idea or for a game, having 5 or 6 people all jamming around, it's kind of like gamified
spreadsheets.
And like we have a little bit of fun. So, you write little messages to people in there as well. No, that's funny. But I think having multiple people be able to like interact at that same time allows you to just produce more better. So I think,
absolutely. We use G Suite, Google G Suite, so docs and sheets and slides, etc. at New Zealand and a few of the other companies. It's just brilliant. Even just that little feature of, I'm talking in a cash flow, and I'll say to someone, just have a look where I am now, and they just click my icon, top right-hand corner, and it'll take them to exactly where my cursor is. So simple but powerful. Yeah, collaboration's great.
And I think, of having a good to-do tool. So like for us, like when we talk about Trello or Jira, depending on the complexity of the task.
Yeah.
It's essential, particularly in software as well, being able to like see what your predicted like launch dates are, your predictive like efforts are. Like if someone's quoting this much time, but they usually take twice as long. Great, that. You can factor that into the time. So
yeah. They're both great products from Atlassian, who James McGregor actually from Biteable used to do a bit of work with the now multi-billionaire owners. And NASA and obviously big companies use those products. They're quite powerful.
Yeah, and then finally, it's just like having a real-time comms tool. So we've all embraced Slack, but there's other ones like Teams. Or we just found for ourselves Slack's the fastest.
Yep, right.
So they're the 4 tools that I sort of use that I think would change any business. And I think that knowledge as well. Like what we take for granted in say like the IT sort of like agile software space, can be revolutionary in other businesses.
Yeah, I agree totally.
And I think that's something really insightful in that knowledge.
Yeah, agile. It's something I really swatted up on in the last 5 or so years, and I've morphed that into I chair the Hobart Brewing Company board down here with a friend of ours, Brendan Parnell, and the coaching I do from an operational point of view, coaching general managers or operations managers, is very much of an agile mindset and just teaching them. We don't have to document to the nth degree. So when I started on the board at HBC, for example, they were producing 15-page minutes for fuck's sake. And it was just like, this is such a waste of time. We're not doing that anymore. And I can see the agile movement really starting to spread into many other facets of business. Yeah. Right, final and my favourite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out of that Flash Kit journey?
All right. So I think I got 2 bits of advice. One is like legal advice. Make sure you read contracts before signing. Make sure you understand them.
Yeah.
Like I've had some good experience and some not so good experience. Nothing that's ever been done to me has been illegal.
Yep.
But I tell you what, if I'd read what I was signing, I would have been a lot better off.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, read, and if you don't understand it, it's worth that expense. Having been involved in the legal process down the track, the first contract that you always get is 100% slated towards the person who's writing it, not to you.
Yeah.
I think there's an anticipated and expected and necessary haggling process over terms. And I didn't know about that at the time.
Yep.
And I think a second piece of advice I'd give myself is stay away from crypto trading. You have no idea what you're doing.
Bitcoin and so on.
Yeah. It was exciting, but ultimately I had no idea what I was doing.
Great. Well, mate, thanks so much for your time today. I think the audience will get a lot of value out of listening to your amazing growth journey, which lasted effectively 6 months and 12 months for the earnout. That's just phenomenal. I've always been in awe at your journey. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, mate.
And for our audience, we'd greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.